Do you want to learn more on how to put money to work in regenerative food and agriculture? Follow our video course via investinginregenerativeagriculture.com/course or in the links below. Now, on to the podcast. You're going to listen to an interview with Renske Lynde, founder and managing director of FS6, to work on the transition to Food System 6. We're going to talk about the whole food system, not just the agriculture part, the production part, the soil health that we've covered so many times, but actually the whole system that's on top of that, and the giant disruptions that are happening in this space, from workers' health, distribution, traceability, but also the need of blended capital to come and support these early disruptors and make sure they reach the impact they need. Enjoy! Welcome to another episode of Investing in Regenerative Agriculture, Investing as if the Planet Mattered, podcast show where I talk to the pioneers in the regenerative food and agriculture space to learn more on how to put our money to work to regenerate soil, people, local communities and ecosystems while making an appropriate and fair return. Why my focus on soil and regeneration? Because so many of the pressing issues we face today have their roots in how we treat our land, grow our food and what we eat. And it's time that we as investors, big and small, and consumers start paying much more attention to the dirt/soil underneath our feet. Before we get started, I've been recording these interviews next to my day job, and I will definitely continue to do so and release about an episode a month. But at the same time, I would love to take this further, share more interviews. There are many more stories to share on investing in regenerative food and agriculture. More depth, improve the quality, maybe even doing some video series. So I started a Patreon community, which makes it easy to support creators like myself. If these podcasts have been of value to you, and if you have the means, I invite you to support me and make this happen. For more information, please find the link to my Patreon account in the description below. And now, without further ado, the interview. Enjoy! So welcome to Investing in Regenerative Agriculture, Investing as if the Planet Mattered. I'm Koen van Seijen, your host, and in the podcast today we have Renske Lynde, impact investor, co-founder and managing director of Food System 6, enabling the best entrepreneurs to revolutionize the way we produce and distribute food globally. And of course we're going to ask the obvious question if it has to do a lot with insects, but probably doesn't. Welcome Renske.
Dankjewel, thank you. It's so nice to hear my name pronounced correctly.
I'm trying. So just to get, before we dive into the personal questions, your impact investing, etc. Food System 6, it has a bit to do with insects as they are part of the future food system, but it's not a project focused only on insects, right?
That's right, exactly. Yes, we do have a team, Tiny Farms, that we worked with in our last cohort and that's in our portfolio. That is working to develop the technology to scale insect protein production, primarily focused on becoming cost competitive with animal feed as a substitute for animal feed. So not necessarily going to market as a new sexy cricket item, but supplying some of that just to help them continue to scale.
And can you tell us a bit more about Food System 6 in general, because it's much more than just helping insect companies.
Yes, definitely. And I'll start by saying that we tend to call our organization FS6, so the accelerator and nonprofit think tank that I founded, we call FS6. And then we talk about Food System 6 in the more general terms, in terms of what we are trying to support the creation of and the acceleration towards a food system. So talk about the fact that humanity has transitioned through 5 different food systems and different iterations and has actually actively designed those systems to meet specific objectives. And so I'll fast forward a little bit to talk about Food System 5, which is the industrialized food system that we are currently experiencing. We're certainly at the tipping point in terms of a transition to another food system. And there's a lot that we can say about why that's happening, and much of which, you have focused on in your podcast in terms of a focus on more sustainable production methods and regenerative methods. But it is also one that we believe will be designed for a more integrated sense of health across the environment and physical health and then social health. So that's the system that we see being actively redesigned at the moment. There's a lot of signs pointing to that we are at that at a transition point, which is exciting for me. So that's how we describe the vision that we hold for the food system itself as Food System 6. And then FS6 is the organization that we founded to help support entrepreneurs that are driving towards that kind of change and that impact in the system.
Great to hear that, really transitioning from one food system to the next. We've only done a few times in the history, and it's very exciting to be part of the next one.
Great.
And if you look at your personal story, how you've been working in food and agriculture and policy for quite some time, what led you into that? And was there one moment, or was it a journey where you got so excited about food that you wanted to spend your professional career in that?
That's a great question. And of course, there's an intimate and deep connection between the personal and the professional. So I have been very interested in the relationship between food production, food distribution since I was a child. I grew up the daughter of immigrant parents who relied on many different forms of food assistance to make ends meet, and so have a very deep and personal connection to equity within the food system, and then went on to build a career in the social sector at a variety of different points. Really, my focus was around how we could transform the food system and create impact for as many people as possible. So that path definitely led me down the policy route, and spent a number of years working on international trade policy on behalf of small-scale sustainable farmers around the world. I have also built direct markets for farmers at the very early days of the recognition here in the States that we needed to think about supporting our local and regional food sheds. And then I've worked on food access more broadly, where I worked on food stamps and school meals. And so it has been a very rich and incredibly rewarding career in the nonprofit sector. And I think that there's an absolutely critical role that nonprofit organizations play in terms of raising awareness, and in this case, about the need to think differently about how we grow, produce, and distribute food. And I think that it has always been a question for me in terms of how the raising of awareness and education can actually meet up with solutions at scale. So that's something that I have spent a lot of time thinking about over the course of the last 20 years in my career. And it's certainly what basically got me to the point at which I was understanding that there was an opportunity to support innovators and entrepreneurs who were coming to the marketplace with innovative solutions that really could scale and be very transformative around the issues that I have worked towards for so long. So it was definitely a journey, and there were certainly moments in that journey where the power of innovation and entrepreneurship was made apparent to me. So one example is I worked at the food bank in San Francisco, and we were trying to improve the quality of school meals that our pantry clients were receiving. And we ultimately granted a contract to a company based here in Oakland, California, called Revolution Foods. So I'm not sure if that's come across your desk.
Yeah, definitely.
So, again, for me, it was a big eye opener in terms of the potential that entrepreneurs can play in really tackling some of the most thorny issues related to the food system that I've been working on for so long. So that led me to doing a fellowship at Berkeley for the Food Institute, where I was examining the opportunity for the social sector to influence and inform what was then the very early days of private sector capital coming into the space. And that was also my introduction to the emergence of the impact investing industry. So those three threads came together, and through the course of the work I did for that fellowship, I met a very unique venture capitalist, and he has gone on to become the co-founder of FS6.
And from that story, it seems that the scale you were looking for really drew you eventually to the entrepreneur side and innovator side. Was that what you were looking for, maybe sometimes missing in the policy side?
Definitely, yes, and we can talk a little bit more about that in terms of just the how FS6 got off the ground, because it actually really was a very cross-sector and collaborative approach to answering some of these questions in the food system that created FS6, and it continues to inform how we engage with a number of different stakeholders all throughout the value chain and also in many different sectors. So I can share a little bit more about that. But yes, I mean, absolutely. The potential that entrepreneurs have to, really not only incredibly, just really disrupt and create entirely new business models, but being able to scale their impact and their mission and their focus as they do. And they're kind of just the passion and the persistence and all of that and the private sector sensibility is certainly something that I felt I was missing in the nonprofit sector. But again, also, we are, as an organization, we are a nonprofit, and we think it's really important that we are, because we do maintain a focus on impact, and we do have a bigger picture mission beyond the work that we do to support the entrepreneurs. We also think there's so much that can be learned from the teams that are really in the trenches trying to solve for some of these issues, that we can then, leverage that to help inform and influence other stakeholders in the system. So yes, it definitely, it's a lot of fun to work with entrepreneurs. They're, incredibly, again, passionate and, really focused on, solving for some incredibly complex issues. And, so we've built a program that we believe can help support them in the many ways in which entrepreneurs need help. It's not easy to build something from nothing. I definitely don't need to tell you that or any of your listeners that, but it's especially more complicated, especially more complex in the food system, given how interrelated all the different parts of the value chain are, and also the dynamic interplay between sectors within the food system, and not to mention the fact that it is a living system. And so that adds an additional layer of complexity. And so all of that really informs the way in which we support our teams as far as capital is concerned, the right form of capital, the right time, as well as just making sure that we are connecting them with those people who are in a position to help support their growth from any number of dimensions and angles.
And if you look at your first cohort, which has finished a while ago, and you're actually going to recruit the new one and select the new ones, which will start in August, can you name one example of the first cohort that really, like you mentioned before, disrupted or is going to disrupt or hopefully disrupt and really surprised you as a partner in Food System 6? What was taking you by surprise during this program?
Okay, so I heard a couple questions in there, and I think that as we like to say, it's like asking a parent who their favorite child is, and of course that's an impossible task. So
they're all equal, I know.
Exactly, but we were very intentional in terms of the teams that we chose, not only because they represented different aspects of the value chain, different dimensions of impact that we saw some really strong interrelationships between, but also because they were approaching the set of problems within the food system and very unique in different ways. And that was really important to us because we don't believe that Food System 6 will be defined by one particular path. And so you opened this conversation by saying, we're more than insects. And that's absolutely true. We see a critical role for the development of an alternative to livestock feed. There's no question that is an absolutely critical issue. It is as important to develop tools and technologies that can help support a transition from current production practices to ones that are more regenerative in nature. And so, when we look at a team like Pasture Map, which is developing a grazing software management platform for ranchers, it looks so different than the insect development, and it looks similarly different from a heritage poultry company, and what it means to build production in a whole new category of poultry. Not sure if you know the statistics around at least domestic poultry production, but over 95% are the same genetic breed, and there's a lot of health implications to that lack of genetic diversity
and risks.
Absolutely. And a lot of, production issues related to that type of concentration in production in across many different forms of animal production, not just poultry. So, I think in terms of the power and the potential, I think, we believe that each of the teams is uniquely and individually quite poised to affect their particular segment and their particular domain. I think in terms of what surprised us, I don't know that I would say there were surprises as much as just really deep and important learnings in terms of, I think the capital landscape is, and this is certainly a subject of this call, but in terms of how capital and different forms of capital, and I'll be explicit that in this case I'm talking about financial capital, can best be leveraged in order to support the kind of impact that we're seeking in the food system. So, and there's a lot of different examples that are emerging in terms of what this kind of blended term sheet might look like. But I think, there's been some conversation around the need for more patient capital in the food system, and lots of good reasons why, we believe that that's entirely aligned with our approach as well. But even more than that, we're very interested in the dialogue and in, seeding conversations around the role that philanthropic capital can play in, helping prove out some of these really innovative market-based solutions that are going to have a very significant social or environmental or human health impact. And so that's, again, it's not as much of a surprise as much as it is just, wanting to really dig in and expose where the opportunities are, and of course where some of the challenges are, and thinking about this kind of capital stack. And there's a few different words that are being used in this landscape. So again, not a surprise as much as just something that we know is a very live and very important area for impact focused entrepreneurs in food to be thinking about. And so we're doing our best to kind of support the conversations and the dialogue, and then obviously ultimately the action around that. So I'd say that's definitely something where, I don't think it's keeping us up at night as much as it is, just something that we want to be able to support the evolution of that dialogue.
And if you look at your first cohort and the second one you're planning now, what's going to be different in terms of what's going to be different in general?
Well, certainly on our side, we are. We do incredibly intense work one-on-one with our teams when we're in our 4-month program, but the work doesn't stop there. And so we're continuing to support the teams that we supported in our last cohort. And so, as issues crop up, which they do when you're building something, just making sure that we're really available and accessible to those teams. We'll sort of add that on to being in cohort with the next set of teams that we work with. There are a few parts of our program that we, will certainly iterate on based on feedback from the teams. We have a heavy emphasis on story, and we will continue to elevate that in terms of its importance. And again, just based on our impact objectives as an organization, sharing the stories of what these teams are experiencing as they're growing and building is just so critical for advancing the field in general. So we will definitely continue that focus. In terms of the teams that we work with, we're excited to continue to expand on the diversity of entrepreneurs, different regions. We supported a team based in Hawaii and one based in Washington, D.C. last time, but we're excited about expanding the regional scope of our work. There's a lot of really interesting place-based activity happening and ecosystems developing on the ground. I'm most familiar with the ones here domestically, but know that this is happening in China and, many other parts of the world. So, thinking about the best way that FS6 as an organization and a platform is poised to help support some of that place-based activity will be really exciting for us. We are very interested in supporting the teams that are actively addressing what we call maybe some of the more overlooked parts of the food system, where we see some really, really critical opportunity for transformative impact. And so some of that has to do with indigenous and native land food production, as well as continuing to support efforts that are thinking about labor all throughout the value chain. Both on the farm and all throughout food service and retail.
Which is very often overlooked.
Exactly. And, I think, as I trace back to the beginning of this conversation and my background and the work that I've done, part of what I like to say to, more traditional investors is, look, the issues that the nonprofit sector are working on, I mean, we not only have sort of a moral and an ethical obligation to support that work because it is so critical, but also in the food system, the issues and topics that the social sector is working on will, inevitably, from my perspective, become business model opportunities of the not too distant future. And I think, you can look back at how the good food movement, broadly speaking, was instigated, and much of that came from the social sector, raising awareness and doing the things that, the organizations I worked with and many, many others like them were doing. And so, I think there's certainly a profit and purpose dual motive in terms of our interest in supporting nonprofit organizations as well.
And when you look at the workers' health, let's call it a bit broadly, what kind of models do you see there in terms of disruption, in terms of, I can imagine a lot of traceability and proven that you're paying well and fairly, etc. But in terms of opportunities, what do you see? What comes across your desk?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and definitely, with the advent and the emerging ability to track and trace and certification systems, I think there's certainly some good precedent that can be built upon, but I also see some significant opportunities for disruption of some of those models that have done a great job, again, in terms of raising awareness, but the implementation and the transparency of the programs isn't always what certainly what consumers are looking for necessarily. I think there are going to be a lot of opportunities on information exchange. So I think that is an area where I'm seeing, I've seen 3 or 4 different platforms using and leveraging, information and information systems to aggregate experiences on the farm that, are going to end up being incredibly useful from just a data perspective. And then, again, the extent to which those are capable of connecting into tracking and tracing and those other systems that are being created to identify attributes as they move through the system. I think there's some extraordinary opportunity there. So we're definitely excited about supporting a team in that space for sure.
Very, very interesting. And in terms of let's have a look at investments, of your personal investments. Do you remember your first sustainable food system or regenerative agriculture investment, and if so, which one was it?
Sure. Yeah, I do. At least to be clear from a financial investment perspective, because I think that there's many different ways in which you can think about investing time, resources, knowledge, and capital across many dimensions. But yes.
Yeah. No, definitely financial.
I was an early stage investor in Imperfect Produce, which is a Bay Area-based company that has developed a distribution system for what they call ugly produce or imperfect produce. So food that would otherwise go to waste because it isn't up to an aesthetic code. And they've built and developed a distribution system for that food, and they're doing extremely well. It's an amazing team. And a team that, is very near and dear to my own heart because they got their start in the nonprofit sector, building a national network of food recovery organizations on college campuses, and identified a business model opportunity to brand Imperfect Produce. And they've done an incredible job, and they continue to grow. And it's been very exciting to be at least a small part of their growth and their trajectory.
Oh, fascinating. And if you look at the FS6, the upcoming cohort, what are you looking for? If people are listening, they're wondering, but does my company or does a company I know fit into this cohort? What are the characteristics, criteria, etc. to be starting in August?
Yeah, that's a good question, and I will say it's not a simple answer, which I'm sure you won't be surprised to hear, because when you're talking about something as complex as the food system, there are a lot of different ways in which you could consider, how you may want to affect change. So the first thing I would say is, if there are entrepreneurs that are listening to this that are thinking about having an impact and wanting to create an impact on, some of the critical issues related to sustainability in food production through a variety of means, or have a business, product, or service that is, thinking about what the health outcomes are as related to the food system. Reach out. It's, we are certainly excited about hearing ideas and concepts and research. Those are all really important for us to, continue to do our jobs well in terms of informing the broader ecosystem about what's going on out there. We are best suited to lend support through our program to teams who are past the kind of idea or concept stage, and who have some product market fit, some traction in the marketplace, and tend to be, and again, there are certainly notable exceptions here, but tend to be pre-institutional capital. That is where I think we are best suited to lend support. And of course, because we support nonprofit organizations, if that's the designation, we're excited to hear about your work. Again, there are certainly exceptions there, because we're, for example, talking to a team that has, raised significantly more capital, but is very interested in expanding their impact focus and in really thinking through some of the issues related to their supply chain. So, there are certainly exceptions in terms of, the stage of a company. So, it's never too early to introduce yourself. We'd love to hear, what you're working on. But generally speaking, it's within that very early stage.
And if you look at, let's say, the last year, and you've been working with these teams of the first cohort, you've been working with a lot of investors on the other side, and you already touched upon it a bit earlier, but I would like to go a bit deeper into that on blended capital. What could the role be, or stacked capital? What's the role of the different layers, and what do you see in these disruptors that they need, and what maybe the market isn't offering yet, but that you're hopefully figuring out in the next few cohorts, how to use different type of capitals, and why is it so important to financial capital in this case, so important to use different ones to actually get these disruptors to scale and the impact that they should have.
Yeah, that's a really good question, and it's certainly something that we're spending a lot of time, like I mentioned, developing some content around, and we'll be doing, both a webinar as well as some white papers on the topic based on, again, some of the case studies that we're seeing in the space, as well as some of our teams that are, working through these issues. So it's a very active and new kind of area, and so from my perspective, I think, the opportunity that these teams represent from an impact standpoint, and the requirement of more patient capital to help them get to scale, prove their concept. I mean, given the fact that there is the complexity of the living production system sitting underneath their tool or technology or business model or program, the need for just longer lead times to be able to actually prove things out. I think there's a really critical role for philanthropic capital to play in that space, because what that's also doing is, creating the opportunity for us to generate learnings, which are, going to absolutely help advance the field and other types of businesses that are coming into the space. So I think there's not only an opportunity for that form of capital to help teams get to a point at which they're able to bring on other types of investors, but also it is, it's a very powerful way to, build the field and to continue to build the capacity of other types of stakeholders and, entrepreneurs that are coming into the space. So, again, there are a few emergent opportunity, or case studies rather, in terms of how this is playing out. I think this is it's a really dynamic space and place for family offices and foundations that are interested in making direct investments into teams, because there's a lot to learn through that process, of being a mission-oriented, impact-focused investor at the table with other types of investors, and how does that work and how can it work? These are all very very important questions in terms of thinking about the future of these kinds of businesses. We have certain types of entities and corporations and legal structures that are cropping up to help, further define this space and further, create opportunities to think about how we blend profit and purpose. But, when it comes to thinking, differently about what the term sheet looks like and, who's at the table, I think there's a lot of opportunity to explore in that. So I definitely know that that's something that we're going to remain, very actively engaged in. And, think we have the ability to bring, a lot of the philanthropic community that has been focused on, some very critical food system issues to the table to, really help influence and inform how these teams grow too. I mean, I think that's the other significant opportunity that we have when we think about the resources and the knowledge that come with philanthropic capital that's been so active in the space. I think, it's a whole different way of thinking about affecting change. A lot of the philanthropic community's focus has been on field building and, on awareness raising and on, changing, what might be construed as bad corporate habits. And that all absolutely needs to continue. But I would add to that, there's an opportunity to also help influence what the next generation of food companies and agriculture companies is going to look like. And sort of being able to pivot and, adjust how we think about this as, again, I think it's a really live opportunity and can really help, carve out this future food system in, I think, a very unique and interesting way.
And do you have an example of maybe your first cohort or anything else in your network where these different types of capital have come together and supported a very disruptive team?
Yeah, this is new. But there are some examples in the space. So Revolution Foods, which is a company that I actually referenced as being sort of, part of my own journey, got its start through a variety of different forms of funding, including some funding from the Kellogg Foundation and RSF Social Finance, as well as some city funding from the city of Oakland. So, there's definitely a kind of blended approach there at the early stages of their company. Most recently, there's a company called Appeal, which has, it's a food waste and food preservation company, primarily coming to market through developing countries, that got its start from grant funding from the Gates Foundation and most recently received a round of venture capital financing from DBL investors. There is a soil health company called Midwestern Bioag that recently received an investment from the McKnight Foundation. So we're definitely starting, and there are a few others in the space. And as I mentioned, we're actively supporting some of our teams right now in this landscape. And so, it's again, it's emergent to some degree, but again, very, I think, exciting opportunity to really think differently, about how we scale entrepreneurs.
And I would like to end this podcast with two questions, actually. Let's say, hopefully they're all smart in the audience, but there are a number of smart impact investors in the audience and also a number of smart foundations and nonprofits that have been active in maybe the more field building and awareness before. What would you say to, the answer can be different for the two groups, that want to become active in the new food system space, the food system 6 in the transition? What would you tell these two different groups that for you would be the best way to get active in this space?
So can you remind me again of the two different?
Yeah, sure. Smart impact investors and the nonprofit side, the foundations that have been maybe more on the field building side, maybe more on the awareness side, but are interested obviously in these very disruptive teams, but they don't really know where to start.
Great. So as far as the impact investors are concerned, I think that there definitely needs to be a level of understanding about just how complex the system is. And I think that looking to some of the, well-established NGOs in the space, sort of, depending on what your area of interest is in terms of the supply chain. So for example, I think we can't think about the future of food production without looking at the work that the Land Institute has done on perennial grain production. I think we can't think about, other, like, for example, seafood and, where the opportunities are to invest in regenerative ocean economies, without looking at the likes of, some of the work that the Moore Foundation has supported. And so I think it's really important for there to be just a a good context setting and, an understanding of where we are in this moment of time. And I would certainly, I point to some of those organizations. There are many others like them, Stone Barns, the Center for Land-Based Living here in Davis. Like, there are some really important leaders, thought leaders, and researchers, and a knowledge base that I think really needs to be accessed while identifying investment, while looking at or examining investment opportunities in the space. So I think those two have to go hand in hand. And then on the other side, I think, from the foundation perspective, I think it's about, thinking that that the opportunity exists to create an impact in a new and different way that, is really, really influential and really impactful to help shape the journeys of these innovators and these disruptors. And I think there's a little bit of a mindset shift that needs to happen in order to support that, which is to say, it isn't, if you choose to make an investment in a company, yes, you are choosing to invest in the success of that company, but the importance of scaling impact along with that company and the role that a foundation and all of that knowledge capital can play in helping do that in the right way, I think it's just such a critical opportunity. So I think that's how I would probably characterize my advice for those two different groups of stakeholders.
I want to thank you so much, Renske, for this interview and to take your time. And of course, I will link below as many of the parties you mentioned, but also the link to apply for the new cohort for anybody that wants to know more and see if they fit.
Great.
And I will be sure to check in with the new cohort and the very interesting companies. I mean, there was a very interesting one, the first cohort, and I'm sure the second one will be even more interesting. So be sure to be checking in and see how they are doing and how SF6 is doing in the future.
Fantastic. Thank you so much.
You just listened to an interview with Renske Lynde. We talked about blended capital, about the whole food system, so not just the agriculture and the production part, but about the disruptions that are needed to really make this a food system that works for all. I hope you enjoyed it and see you back soon for more of these podcasts. If you found the Investing in Regenerative Agriculture and Food podcast valuable, there are a few simple ways you can use to support it. Number 1, rate and review the podcast on your podcast app. That's the best way for other listeners to find the podcast, and it only takes a few seconds. Number 2, share this podcast on social media or email it to your friends and colleagues. Number 3, if this podcast has been of value to you and if you have the means, please join my Patreon community to help grow this platform and allow me to take it further. You can find all the details on patreon.com/regenerativeagriculture or in the description below. Thank you so much and see you at the next podcast. Dear friends of the podcast, I'm super excited to share with you the online video course Investing in Regenerative Agriculture and Food. How to put money to work in regenerating soils at scale and growing a lot of tasty food while doing it. Why are we doing this course? After 100 interviews and more than 100 hours of audio asking the question how to put money to work in regenerating soils, and have been following the space since 2011 and recording these podcasts since 2016, we thought it was time to share our lessons learned. What have we seen in the space over the last years? How have we built our decision-making framework? What to focus on with the podcast? How have we picked interviewees? What questions should you ask? What is happening in the space? What should you read? What should you listen? What should you watch? How to approach this space? For whom is this course? You, the soil builders and investors in this space. The soil builders, people working in this space, entrepreneurial farmers, fund managers, vehicle builders, crowd investing, platform builders, agtech companies, farm-to-gut food companies, permaculture, keyline designers, holistic management consultants, etc., etc. People that are building soil at scale. And the investors who are putting their own money to work through their family office or as private individuals, or people who are putting other people's money to work through foundations, institutional capital, banks, insurance companies, etc. Is this course free? No. This is pay what you think it's worth. Meaning, I have no way of knowing what this course will be worth to you. And I'm very aware that among the listeners of this podcast, we have people with very different means. So I'm inviting you, if this course is creating value to you, and if you have the means, to consider paying what you think it's worth. Thank you. So what is this course? It's currently a series of 17 videos, mostly ranging from 10 to 15 minutes, plus PDF slides, so you don't have to ride along. We're gonna look into why invest in regenerative agriculture and why extractive agriculture is so risky, how to invest, what kind of frameworks you could and I think should build, what to invest in, what kind of co-investors you could find, or what kind of investors you could find if you're a soy builder. Every lesson will have a digging deeper part where I will share what kind of reports, what kind of interviews, what kind of videos you can look into if you want to dig deeper. We're going to look at nutrient density, landscape design, and a lot more. So what is it not? It's not a list of investable deals. Unfortunately, that doesn't exist in this world. We're really at the beginning of the regenerative agriculture and food revolution. It's also not investment advice. Before making any investment, please find professional investment advice. So get ready, get a cup of coffee, a cup of tea, or whatever you're drinking. Click on the link below, sign up, and I'm really looking forward to your feedback.